Hello, folks, and thank you all so much for coming out to the sixth and final live Q&A in our Royal Family series with Shinan Govani. We are, over the next 20 minutes, going to be diving into the great questions that you submitted us this week in response to Shinan's sixth and final lecture, in which he explored the future of the royal family and the emerging influence and personalities of the House of Windsor's younger generations, Harry, Meghan, William, and Kate. We really enjoyed the great questions you sent us this week, and we're going to dig into them in just a minute. But before we do, I just want to remind all of you at home that we've just launched our first ever summer season of Curious Minds courses. We just launched 2 new courses for registration. They will begin streaming on our online platform at the end of July. One is an exciting new series on Neil Young, led by Dr. Mike Daly. The other is a course called The Age of Reinvention, looking at the cultural movements of the post-World War II decades, led by another popular Curious Minds lecturer, Dr. Peter Harris. So if you go to our website, you can find more information on those new series. But in the meantime, it is a real pleasure to cap off this exciting journey through the history of the House of Windsor with our fearless leader, one of Canada's most intrepid Royals watchers, the one and only Shinan Govani. Please join me in giving him your warmest Curious Minds welcome. How are you,
Hi,
Shinan?
Will. How are you? Thank you. It's our swan song.
It is indeed. It is indeed. And we've got some really great questions, I think, to send us off in style into the summer. We're going to start by just wrapping up one of the loose ends from last week's conversation. We were talking a bit about Mystique, the island that Princess Margaret had among the international jet set in the latter decades of the 20th century. Carly had written in to ask, in reference to Mystique, where does the royal jet set charges go to vacation, and Harry and Meghan and others? So where do the royals right now, today, 2020, well, prior to the COVID epidemic,
yes,
where do they go to enjoy their leisure around the world?
Within the general theme that we have been looking at from the beginning of our series, from Queen Victoria, in that I think it's always interesting to see how the royals influence different trends, even beyond the royal courts, how they are impactful in terms of popularizing certain trends. Purchased in 1958 for 50 cotton production, but then sort of leaned into making the island a hot spot for the wealthy and the famous. Mystique is technically part of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And in 1960, he gifted a plot of land to Princess Margaret as a wedding present. And that's when sort of the legend of Mystique really took off. She honeymooned there. She spent a fair bit of time there even later with her lover at the time during the 1970s. We talked a little bit about that. She was quoted as saying it was like, the only place where she could truly relax. And then after her death, she gave that plot of land, the house that she owned there, to her son, who then later sold it. And one can actually rent out the place now. But it is interesting sort of just making that sort of connection to that era, because Princess Margaret started it, but then it became a hotspot for the likes of, Mick Jagger and David Bowie, and it's continued to this point. Like people like Tom Ford, etc., spend time there, as do, of course, Kate and William. They did celebrate a birthday of Prince George there not long ago. They've been spotted at Basil's Bar, which is kind of like the known hotspot there. And I think it continues to be attractive to the super wealthy and the famous, because there is a kind of hushed, minimalist extravagance about it, if you will. There's no airport strip, so like you're not getting like this influx of people. There's no place to even dock a yacht, so it doesn't even get sort of that crowd. And in many ways, it is untouched. It's very similar to the place that Princess Diana specifically spent a lot of time at her friend Sir Richard Branson's island, Necker Island, which has a lot of lore as well. There's one famous photo of William and Harry burying their mother, Diana, in sand on one of their sort of, time out vacations. So that's a popular spot. Eden Rock in St. Bart's has also taken on a bit of royal patina, because there's actually a bit of a connection now to the royals, in that Kate's sister, Pippa Middleton, jet set spot as well. So there's that connection. In terms of other places, Fergie and Andrew honeymooned in the Azores in Portugal. More recently, Princess Beatrice and her then fiance James Brookspan went to Nicaragua, which is where she was proposed to. So that's interesting. Klosters in Switzerland is where William and Harry learned to ski and spend time in. I talked a fair bit about that in my last lecture, just about like the world of royals and skiing and winter sports. Diana went to Egypt. There are some fabulous photos of her leaning up against the pyramids. And then Camilla and Charles have spent time in India. He celebrated his 65th birthday in India. One does get the sense that, a lot of this has remained a special there in 1952. And just to make it all full circle, William returned to the same spot in the Mount Kenya area years later, forth between the past and the present, even when it comes to some of these vacation hotspots.
Indeed, a family that gets around, for sure. Okay, earlier Q&As. You can host a dinner party with any three members of the House of Windsor that you have discussed over the course of this series. Who do you invite and why? And what's on the menu? What's being served for dinner?
What a fun question. Yes. I think I would start with Princess Margaret, but the Princess Margaret of the 1960s and 70s, not when she sort of hardens a bit later on. I think she was such a spark plug, as many people have seen from watching The Crown. And she melded all these different worlds together, the worlds of the arts and jet set, et cetera. So definitely Princess Margaret. I have a feeling that she would be wonderfully dishy and bitchy, which, is always fun during a dinner party.
Yep.
I think the Queen Mother would be up there for me. I just think in terms of history, she was in the room. She was in the room like when the abdication happened. She was there during the Second World War, during the Blitz, not leaving the capital. Then she was in the room during the whole saga of Diana and Diana's death. And so she represents this long sort of horizon of history. And, you got a sense interesting to get in private. And then thirdly, kind of a wild card, I would pick India Hicks, who I've had lunch with before. She is technically at last recall the 678th in line to the throne. She is the granddaughter of Lord Mountbatten. So her mother was Lady Pamela Mountbatten, who was a lady in waiting to Her Majesty the Queen. That was her mother. And then her father was David Hicks, who's one of the most famous interior designers of all time, very, very sort of synonymous with 60s Britain. So India Hicks is a designer of note, a philanthropist. She was also a bridesmaid at Princess Diana's wedding. So she goes back to the Diana days. Her mother goes back to Elizabeth's wedding. So I think she would be interesting. And where would we do it? Where India Hicks lives on Harbor Island in the Bahamas. She's sort of built kind of a resort there of sorts. And I think that would be a fun place to go. So those are my three things.
Outstanding. Hopefully, hopefully Margaret and the Queen Mum won't get into an epic fight over the course of the
or
the
maybe they will. Maybe that would add to the dinner party.
Yes. Fodder for a great column,
yes.
Shinan. Absolutely. Okay, so we're going to shift gears now a bit, and we're going to look a little bit more at this sort of the current younger generation of royals who are really seizing the headlines these days. Karen wrote in to ask how you would compare the relationship between William and Kate and Harry and Meghan to the dynamic between Queen Elizabeth and Princess Margaret. This sort of
and Meghan, is that the question?
I think it's just asking, yeah, or it's a little bit hard to tell from the phrasing, or between William and Harry and Elizabeth.
Yeah, I mean. Yes, there are parallels there, as there always are when there's a heir and the spare. I think this developed them, but at the same time, you know, they're never going to be the ones in the spotlight or have power per se. And of course, like the Queen and Margaret. Like William and Harry know each other more than any one other person will know either of them. So they've shared so much, have been part of the same sort of spectacle of history. But at the same time, there's the normal sibling dynamics, and those dynamics shift as you age and once you have your own families. So of course, those dynamics are very clear. Those parallels are clear.
Yeah. Right. And then a follow-up question on this new generation of royals. A number of our audience members wrote in to ask, they're very just interested to hear your impressions on Meghan Markle and her role in the House of Windsor, and what she means to it as an institution. In your opening lecture, you made given us a really interesting perspective, talking about the unique relationship you have with the royal family, given your own experience as a person of color, but also your family's background in countries that were former British colonies. A number of folks wrote in to ask, what does it mean to you to see Meghan Markle as part of this family, and what does it mean to the royal family as an institution?
Yeah, well, specifically around Meghan, it's been very interesting as a case study, as a way into the royals and my own sort of relationship with them, different lenses, because I was looking at it as a royal watcher and a journalist. I was looking at it as a person of color, and then I was looking at it as someone who knew Meghan when she lived in Toronto, had hung out with her. She once came to my house for a dinner party. So I bring all of that to my sort of view on it. So as an observer and as a royal watcher, I was totally jazzed about this turn of events because it created all these new storylines, and Meghan represented all of the things that you would maybe not expect from a royal bride. And in terms of shaking things up, like not only was she biracial, but she was older, she was divorced, she was an actress, she was an American, like many of the things that made Wallace Simpson several decades ago, but not that long ago in the span of the royals, that made Wallace completely, an untouchable to some extent. So it was interesting to see Meghan sort of, accepted and embraced to a large extent. As a person of color, I also thought it was interesting in terms of the modernization of the royals, what this represented. And whatever one can say about, what has happened in more recent months with Harry and Meghan, just going back to the wedding of Harry and Meghan is an incredible historic moment when you remember like that black choir singing and Charles walking Meghan, down the aisle, in terms of like the history of the royals and colonization and stuff, a profound moment. Having said that, I always was of the fact that, having known her, but also just aware of her life history and where she was at the moment she married Harry, it always seemed sort of fraught with, with danger. I mean, one thing I always refer to is that when Meghan married Harry, she was the same age as Diana was when she died. Diana was this like young bride who was maybe moldable, within the royals, while Meghan was someone who had tasted freedom, who knew what it was to have her own career and her own voice, and whatever expectations she had in terms of going into that family and going into that institution and changing it, or bending it towards what Meghan represented, it was always sort of difficult to see working just in terms of change, and people are much more accepting. It is a very difficult sort of in-between world to be royally unroyal. And given that their platform now and their sort of pixie dust, if you will, involves having been royals, the more that they do all of this celebrity stuff, the more ironically it chips away at the very reason that they have kind of a halo around them. So that kind of celebrityhood is a Faustian bargain in a way.
Yes.
You're putting yourself on the open marketplace of celebrity, and you have to continuously put yourself. So how is that all going to work out? It's going to be interesting to watch.
Absolutely. Yeah. So Shinan, I'm afraid we're running out of time, but in effect, you've pretty much answered what was our final question, which was, a question looking ahead to the future of the monarchy as an institution. Is it sliding into irrelevance? Does the House of Windsor have the potential to continue to thrive into the 21st century? You kind of touched on that right there, though, that there's promise and peril that lay ahead. Much of it will lie in this intersection of celebrity and royalty that you've been exploring throughout the series.
I mean, this is the great open question of the series and any conversation about the royals. So much of the goodwill for the royals is banked in the admiration for Her Majesty. When Her Majesty Elizabeth leaves us, what will it mean, especially in a world where the hereditary principle has totally weakened in the last 50 years or so, and we moved into this meritocratic, pluralistic world. So much of it depends on the synergy between the public and the royals, and maintaining sort of a certain level of admiration for the royals, and for the Brits in particular, feeling like they're getting their money's worth from the royals. So who knows? It's going to be treacherous. Having said that, there have been many treacherous periods in the history of the royals. I encourage people to look back at history. There are many moments where the House of Cards could have fallen altogether, and yet it has endured. So maybe not a safe bet to count it out altogether.
Indeed, the plot will continue to thicken. We will continue to watch with bated breath. And
I think someone else mentioned, and we'll just point out that Tina Brown, who wrote that great book on Diana, is at work on a kind of a sequel called The Palace Papers, everything that happened post Diana. So in terms of something to look forward to, I think that book will be an interesting one to look out for. I don't know when it's coming out, but we will keep our eyes out.
I want to encourage you folks at home, if you've enjoyed this great journey Shinan has taken us on over the last 6 weeks, make sure to check out his wonderful writing for the Toronto Star and all other places. Follow him on Twitter. He is doing amazing work every week, week in, week out, looking at the intersection of celebrity and pop culture and entertainment. Just it's a delight to read your words on the page, Shinan, and it's been a delight to have you with us throughout this series. We hope to have you back again for more great events here at Hot Docs in the not too distant future. Thank you so much for all your hard work on this series and for being such a delightful guide.
Yeah, no, thank you for giving me this platform, and it's been a hoot. Very good. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Shinan. Thank you to all of you at home. We hope to see you back for our summer season of Curious Minds, now open for registration. Have a wonderful weekend.